So this session is entitled Utilizing Transparent Data to Drive Improvement at the Center Level. Again, if you're a QI geek like me, that might be a very exciting title, but for those of you who aren't as versed in it, what do we mean by this? Well, as a network leader, it's my job to really think about those big experiences like Kiona said. How are we doing as a network? What does it look like to have 69 centers working on the same outcome? How are we moving our collective dot? But the truth is, the only way we do that is by 69 individual centers working hard at the local level. And we have measures that we follow as a network, but we can't follow all of them. We can't have giant projects for each and every one of them. And the truth is, at an individual center, the number of ideas that you get out of a conference like this is probably in the double digits, if not the triple digits, depending on how many people you bring. And a lot of the improvements in the two care centers that I've been a part of are because of that informal exchange of ideas that happens, not because somebody at the podium was telling you what to do. Melissa's story, which is from Kansas City Mercy's program, is about as good as it gets when it comes to an individual center getting ideas from a network and coming home and putting those ideas to work. So I hope that you all find it as inspiring as I do. I'm going to take a minute to set her up and then I'll let her tell you the story. Hopefully I won't. Spoiler alert, it's a good one. So this story starts back in November 2019, almost 4 years ago. If you, like me, have been around for a while and have a hard time remembering which learning session was which, this was the last one before the pandemic. It was the first single ventricle day. That was an experiment that we weren't sure about how it was going to go, which was hugely successful. I believe this is the word cloud that was generated by the attendees at that first single ventricle day, which I think is just still so impressive to look at. And that was the conference where some of us then hopped in the car and went down the road a couple miles to meet up with our other Cardiac Networks United partners. So 4 years is a long time, and think about where we were. The entire world has changed since then. And I'm emphasizing that because sometimes that's how long it takes to do an effective improvement project, especially when you're working with small patient populations, and especially when a global pandemic maybe throws things off or maybe helps. So just think about, so don't get discouraged. If you're 2 years into something and it isn't working, it might still pay off for you. We were looking at that learning session at funnel plots, which is what we use in MPC QIC to look at causes of variation, which is a really critical thing that we do in quality improvement. We look at funnel plot data relative to what's called the funnel control limits, which I'll show you in a minute. And as a network, again, our network planning team is looking for special cause. We're looking for centers that are outperforming the rest of the network, and then we look for centers that are underperforming. Individual centers and MPC teams, you have your own number, and we will have funnel charts available for you to look at. When you look at those, your question for yourself is, where are we? Are we in the common cause section or negative special cause or underperforming? And your question then is, what can we learn from other people while we're here? If you're in the positive direction, the question is, what can you teach others? What is it different about your program? What have you learned that might help your colleagues? So this is what a funnel plot looks like. This is old data, so don't pay attention to the numbers or any individual dots. And funnel plots are a little different from other charts we use in quality improvement because instead of having time on the x-axis, it's a snapshot in time. And the x-axis is the number of patients that an individual center has enrolled in a registry. So each dot on this funnel plot is an individual center. X-axis is the number of patients in the registry. The y-axis is whatever our measure is. It's usually a percentage as it is here. The red line going through the middle is the mean of all the data points that you see. And then the dotted lines that kind of funnel in, adjusting for small sizes in our smaller volume centers, is roughly 3 standard deviations above and below that mean. So to read a funnel chart, you want to start by looking at that arrow in the top right corner that shows you which direction you want to go. Some of our measures we want to go up, others we want to go down. Because this is a measure where we want to go up, we look at that handful of centers that are above that dotted line. I have a laser pointer, but I know we have 2 screens. But this group of centers right here, going over here, are our special cause centers in the positive direction. So those centers are doing better than what we would expect based on the statistical variation of the entire network. We want to learn from what those centers are doing. There's one center that's just barely below the lower control limit here. That's a center that isn't performing as well. Maybe they're behind on their data collection, who knows? But that's a center that wants to look at their data and think about how they could do better. We do this because, again, it helps us decide which type of variation is at play. And this comes from Schuchart, who's one of the forefathers of the quality improvement method. And he talked about common cause variation, which are causes inherent in the system over time. They're always there, they impact everybody, and they affect all outcomes of the system. And then there's special cause, those causes that are not a part of the system all the time or don't affect everybody, but arise because of specific circumstances. I find it easier to explain this now that we've all lived through a global pandemic and a time of special cause when everything was just weird. And now we're hopefully getting back closer to common cause variation. It's important to understand which of these two are at play. Sometimes it's both. In your system, because if you want to develop an effective intervention, you need to make sure that you're addressing the right type of variation. Frequently seen special causes, this is kind of a bullet point list. And again, I learned this at that November 2019 meeting. The most common special cause reason is having different operational definitions of a measure. That's a Lloyd Provost pearl that has stuck in my brain since then. What that means is maybe you were always performing like everybody else, and then something changed a few years ago and you realize that's right when you had a different person entering your data. Maybe they were just interpreting a data point differently than the previous person who was putting it in. Or maybe I call a practice something and Melissa calls it something else. We just have different operational definitions of what we're doing. That doesn't mean the care is different. It just means we're interpreting the definition differently. So again, something to know and understand about what's going on. If you are special cause, you want to start by asking that question, are we using a different operational measure? And then you want to work your way down through these other bullet points to think about what might be causing the differences. At the very bottom there, you can see what we think is often at play here, which is different care processes. There's just something different about what our center is doing, either positive or negative, that's making us perform differently than the network is as a whole. If you're in the negative special cause, the question then becomes, how could we improve our care processes? And so that's our challenge to you while you're here this weekend, is to ask yourselves, what does your team need to work on? NPC-QIC teams, you have data to look at, you have funnel charts, and you know which number is your dot. And we've showed you the toolkits that I showed previously can be used to get some good ideas. And then importantly, the best resource is everybody who's here. So head to the Improvement Expo, find one of those special cause centers, and start gathering some ideas and thinking about what it would take to adapt and put them into practice at your center. FON teams, you don't have to be constrained by data. You can choose whatever you want to work on. And you actually don't need data. If you see a new great idea that you're not doing at your center, you're 0%. So start there and build it up. The question for you is, what can you learn while you're here? Whose contact info can you get to follow up in a couple weeks? And then one of my favorite maxims from Improvement, which is, what can you do by next Tuesday? It's really easy to come and have a good weekend and then go out for drinks and then go home and kind of get back into the swing of things. But set a concrete goal for yourself. Push yourself to move quickly. What can you get done in the next 3 or 4 days? Can you just start scheduling that meeting? Can you email the person you met at the NPC learning session so you at least have that address in your outbox? Get yourself moving. Get the improvement going, and hopefully Melissa will inspire you to achieve your own special cause.
Hello, I am just one of the people from our center that is here to talk on behalf of what happened to us. So I am not the only one. I just happen to be the one up here in the bright lights. So I'm Melissa Elliott. I am a nurse practitioner from Children's Mercy, Kansas City, and I work with the Interstage Home Monitoring Program, which we call CHAMP at our center. I'm going to talk to you about nourishing tiny hearts. So how did we leverage data transparency to improve feeding in our single ventricle population? So just to review our feeding process, I know each center here can be very different. We do not send children home with NGs during the interstage, so you either eat by mouth or you need to get a G tube. The interstage team manages all feeds until the Glen, so we ask the pediatricians to not help with feeds, and our patients see a registered dietitian and now a speech therapist as well at every single interstage visit. So 2019, Katie started us there. After the learning session, the NPC team reached out to us and said, hey, you guys have a special cause analysis. You're in the negative, one of only 4 centers, which I'll show you the graph in a second. So we had the opportunity to think about how are we going to improve our outcomes on this. So the first thing we thought is we definitely need to involve key stakeholders. And our special cause analysis was about preoperative oral feeds. So the 2 stakeholders that we identified were parents, patients, families, of course, number 1 always. And then at our center, when babies are born, they go to the NICU until surgery. So the NICU is responsible for all preoperative oral feeds. We went back and talked to those two centers, and we were able to identify two targets. So interestingly, that we was preoperative oral feeds that we were called out for, but we found when talking about feeds that we also had to talk about tube weaning. So tube weaning and preoperative oral feeds were our targets. I like to think that our why can always be the cute babies, right? This is one of our current patients, and the parents sent over this picture, and it just makes me tear up almost because we didn't ask for a picture. We didn't know parents were even working on this, but they started seeing our speech therapist, and this patient was not taking any food by mouth. He was 100% using his G-tube. And through several visits, our speech therapist worked with the family, and a child who had a lot of oral aversion was now doing messy food play. And as you can see, he has food all over his face, and this just made us all so excited to see it. But unfortunately, to drive this change, we also needed a little bit of data. NPC wouldn't exist if we didn't need data, right, to make changes. So we used this chart, which I had alluded to a little bit already. So this was in the fall of 2019 with preoperative stage 1 oral feeds. And that circle is right around our center, the worst in the entire collaborative for preoperative oral feeds. And this one was honestly kind of really straightforward why we were negative special cause, because we did not feed preoperatively across the board if you had hypoplastic left heart syndrome. So I said we had key stakeholders. First were the parents, and the timing was really right for the spring virtual learning session in 2020, which happened to be during the pandemic. But I believe parents still came to our center that year. We always we get a conference room at the hospital and invite everybody to come down for the virtual learning session. So that gave us an opportunity to talk to the parents one-on-one and say, hey, here's this really terrible graph. How can you guys help us? What do you want to see us do? So actually, I think it was our two parents who are sitting at the table with us today that said, hey, we have this local Facebook group, which you guys cannot be a part of because your children don't have heart differences, but we're willing to get on there and kind of be, covert secret operatives and post this on your behalf. And they asked parents, what they felt about feeds. What did you think about your kids eating before surgery? What is your experience with tube weaning? Is your experience driving you to go to other centers? So really just asking for a lot of feedback we probably didn't want, honestly. So when we looked at the feedback, which I'm going to share a little bit in a second, but we identified 4 themes from the parent feedback. First, there's a lack of consistency and communication with and between providers. We're not listening to parents or considering their point of view when it comes to feeds. We're looking to other sources to find the right tools. And parents definitely thought it was very important to start early and at birth with oral feeding. I'm not sharing any scary pictures or anything, but I'm going to share some quotes from parents about feeding. And definitely through this experience, I've learned it can be a very emotional process for parents. So I just wanted to give the opportunity for anybody who doesn't want to hear. It's nothing terrible, but if you need to take a break. So this is some selected parent feedback, which still gives me chills. I strongly believe those first few newborn hours and days when they still have a strong sucking instinct need to be rewarded with milk in their mouths. I think letting these kids eat when they are born would be a huge asset to them. I think the main problem is too many different opinions. No one was on the same page. I took our G-tube wean into my own hands. We felt unheard by, I removed the care team here, and feel they are too rigid in their practice with GTs. Our suggestion would be listen to the parents. I know they go off numbers and charts, but each child is unique and different. So I talked about we're doing 2 different things here. So I'm going a little bit backwards. We're starting at the end with tube weaning. But at our center, our patients were all referred to a clinic that follows neonates. So anybody who went to the NICU and any of our patients that had a G-tube, we sent them there. And we found that clinic was using the same approach on every single patient. And you can imagine that all the patients that are in the NICU after they're born, it's a whole scope of disease process and, problems that they have. So when we looked at their approach, we found that's not really necessarily the right approach for all of our patients. So we looked around the hospital like, hey, who else is here who can do this G-tube weaning? Because we're cardiology, we definitely don't want to do that, right? So we found the GI multidisciplinary feeding clinic, and we showed them that ugly graph and said, please help us. We're the worst in the whole collaborative. They focus on short-term tube management and weaning for also a multitude of patients, but usually they're at least eating a little bit by mouth. And they were actually really excited to help us. Their team is made up of a physician, nurse practitioner, nurse, speech therapist, and dietitian. And that team's going to become really important for later in my presentation when I talk about who we added to our team. So we just started referring all of our patients there. We didn't ask anybody's permission except for them. And if you were taking a little bit, at least by mouth, you were able to, we would send you over to the multidisciplinary feeding clinic after graduation. And this has been wildly successful. Other cardiology populations besides single ventricles are using this. That was something that came from the Facebook feedback, was it's not just our patients. At our center, it happened to be a lot of cardiology patients that nobody wanted to wean their G-tube. So on the other end of the spectrum, we looked at preoperative oral feeds. And this one, like I said, we weren't feeding any patients before surgery. So like Katie said earlier, we kind of started at zero and said, what can we do? So we had the opportunity here to really harness the power of the network and look at the preoperative feeding information that was already there. And we went to the NICU team, showed them the ugly chart and said, hey, can you guys help us? And they were actually, we were really lucky that some of the neonatologists that were part of the meeting were kind of already asking the question, like, why aren't we feeding these kids? So we worked with a dietitian in the NICU, physician, and then a nurse practitioner, actually from our cardiology consult group. And they used the NPC things, made the preoperative feeding protocol, and then went out and educated everybody, bedside nurses, the speech therapists, occupational therapists, and said, hey, we're going to start doing this. Here's the protocol. And we kept hearing the same thing, which was like, we're really afraid these babies are going to get neck, which, is kind of a bad word probably around here. So as we were doing the project, we gathered some data on a lot of different things. Of note, this protocol included all single ventricle patients, so not just the ones that would be captured in NPC. They tracked the data with different PDSA cycles and found that rates of neck were not increased. And then the rates of preoperative oral feeding for this group went from 39.5 to 75%. And that actually, hot off the press, was just published in Cardiology of the Young. So I would say keys to success for our center, listen to the parent feedback 100%, right? These babies are with their parents all of the time. So if you guys don't agree on the plan of care, then we're not going to get anywhere because they're going to do what they want to do. You really need someone to own the feeding experience. So when we had talked to the different key stakeholders, we found nobody wanted to be in charge, right? Everybody's scared of these babies. So they really needed somebody to own it and say, hey, this is okay. Let's do it. Let's wean the tubes. Let's feed them before surgery. And when looking kind of internally at our process, we found that, we were pushing feeds a lot in our clinic. We were just like, all the data came out about kids do better at the Glen when they have good nutrition and they're not malnourished. So we're like, get the food in them. And we found we were pushing kids so much that maybe they weren't having a positive feeding experience. Maybe they were throwing up more. So let's focus a little bit more on the positive feeding experience. And we don't have to push so much for, having the best growth. And then really having a structured handoff. When we looked at even our system with handing off the patients to that neonatal follow-up clinic, we weren't doing a structured handoff to say, hey, here's where we are, here's our next steps or our goals. And, that probably definitely slowed down the process because we weren't telling them what to do next. And then this was a big COVID win for us, which I just thought we had to highlight because how many COVID wins do we have, right? We had increased communication on our team with Microsoft Teams because of COVID. So now the nurses and nurse practitioners have access to our dietitian and to our speech therapist all the time. Maybe they don't like that so much, but we can get feedback from them in real time instead of waiting for clinic or waiting for our weekly checkout. And then next steps for us. So I alluded a bit to it. Our speech therapy colleagues actually are here with us today. They are now coming to our clinic visits all of the time. We are having them see all of our inpatients, and we are really having a lot of success, and I'm excited about that. I also alluded to the clinic wait times. So the multidisciplinary feeding clinic is now very popular, and there's like a 6-month wait. So I am very inspired by Colorado Children's. I don't know where you are, but you guys presented last month at the AP webinar. Hello. And I was just so excited about the weaning that you guys are doing in cardiology clinic, that we're doing it. It's happening. We're going to start weaning, and I'm going to take out a G-tube in our clinic.